Vårt första panelsamtal har titeln Dialog som demokratins motor. Vad bygger förtroende och tillit? Och den som ska inleda det här passet, det är en person som vi är jätteglada har kommit hit. Och jag ska byta till engelska nu.
Yes.
Nu ska jag presentera Associate Professor Jason Pridmore. Let's see, Jason. There you go. So you have a long title, but I'm going to zoom in on what's really important here today, Jason, as you asked me to do. You're the coordinator of COALESCE. It's a 4-year project that is aiming to establish the European Competence Center for Science Communication. You're very much welcome here. And you're going to frame this day with a talk that we asked you to do. It's about effective science communication in an era of AI, the challenge of ensuring public trust. Please, Jason, the floor is yours.
Thank you so
and
much.
The clicker is there.
Perfect. And stand up.
Thank you, Anders, and thank you, Lotta, and thank you all for joining us today. Of course, I'll do this talk in English because my Swedish is non-existent. Okay, but I start here because I will talk briefly about the COALESCE project. I'm really pleased to share a bit more about what we're doing in that project and how Sweden and science communicators in Sweden, including the V&A, are actually participating with us. Before I do that, I want to start with, as what the youths might call, a bit of a vibe check. How are we doing? How are we doing as science communicators, I mean? And I ask this because it seems that the picture is pretty bleak at the moment. There is a rise of populism, anti-science discourse, misinformation, disinformation, and just plain bad science that is out there. There's climate crisis deniers, there's vaccine resistance, there's people literally attacking scientists because of their research and work based on different ideologies. And although I myself am a Canadian, I've been living in the Netherlands for 15 years. I was born in the United States to a Canadian migrant, so very international background. I haven't lived there in 24 years, although I did still vote, and you might guess where I voted because I just don't recognize that country anymore and struggle, and so for the past several weeks have kept my head in the sand like the proverbial ostrich. I asked that question because it seems a bit bleak and a bit hopeless, and I was reminded of this quote by Isaac Asimov, who talks about the fact that this is a struggle for us. And I start there because I only myself have recently taken up my understanding and role as a science communicator, as somebody who attempts to communicate critical issues. I started describing myself as an accidental science communicator, mainly because I study critical understandings of data science. Previously a lot on surveillance practices, digital tools. And I'm surrounded, especially in COALESCE, but in other places, by people who study things like climate, health, astronomy, physics. And I kept wanting to ask, hey, wait, isn't data science a science too? Isn't the manipulation of our data, the advertising and algorithmic processes, actually, in some sense, part of what has created some questionable situations that we all are experiencing ourselves? And of course, I want to talk about data science, and we need to talk about the bigger issues we face, most specifically, the horrific fact that we're doing limited things on the climate crisis at the moment. But of course, these are critical issues that we should be talking about. And my colleagues and I have a paper that we're working on that will be talking about the long tail, sort of the idea that we need to infuse a science communication, a science approach, an understanding of science early on and make this happen longer term. And I'm reminded that little things, we talk about big things all the time, but little things are actually quite interesting, and engaging people in those ways is quite important. Yesterday, my news feed. There's a part where I'm ignoring my news feed, literally, from anything political at the moment, and then up and comes on my news feed. We finally know what's in the moon. And that was a nice moment for me. Apparently, I didn't read all of it, but it's not cheese. Yeah. And then a scarlet tanager, a small bird from North America, showed up in the UK, and a whole bunch of bird watchers flocked to this little small town to look at it, just to catch a glimpse. For those of you who missed the bird watchers and flocking, that was a purposeful pun, but okay, I see that one doesn't go over well. I'll take it out of the routine. But here is this thing, this appreciation for science that actually we want to infuse in a public so that we actually can make sure that people are understanding some of the bigger issues and a clearer understanding of science. And I talk about this in this accidental science communicator status and realize, yeah, okay, I think most of us actually are more accidental science communicators than purposeful science communicators. It may be smaller in data science in my area, but of course I think that's changing slowly. But most of us didn't start by thinking how I wanted to be a science communicator. We had other plans in life, but those began to change. And before I lose my voice. So we all had other plans in life. And let's be honest, we all entered science communication for the same reason: money. Yeah. Sorry, that's for those of you who are just starting out. This is a gift for you. Right, it goes Stefan Persson, Taylor Swift, random footballers, science communicators. So if you're in your next negotiation moment on a salary and you're not making that kind of money, this is, you can just say, I was at the Forum for Science Communication and this random guy from the Netherlands/Canada came and told me that I should be rich. Why am I not getting that money? So that's a gift for you now. But something changed in the way in which we were doing our work. We connected the complexities, the nuance, the struggles, the insights, the surprise of science in ways that made sense, that opened up people's mind, including our own, that reshaped the way they think and we think. And I think we need to leverage and recapture that moment and reinforce that, particularly in times where things might seem bleak. Last week, I was in a meeting, just one-on-one meeting, and I saw this person pass by my office, and you could just see she was bubbling. It was my PhD, and she just started teaching. And I saw that she really had to say something at that moment, and I said, okay, can you just pause for a second? She came in, and she talked about how much she loved teaching, and she was just overflowing with enthusiasm. And I was reminded of that moment that I have experienced many times in my life of connecting with people and actually having them get it and understand, and how sometimes I worry that that enthusiasm gets lost in the stress and pressures of a world that seems bleak, and the work pressures that we have and the demands that we job, and those wonderful people that we are trying to work with, connect with, and reach. And I do mean wonderful in terms of sometimes I really wonder about them, and also how interesting they are. So I did promise to talk about three key things here, and I'm going to just mention them briefly. I only have a few minutes with you all, and I'm happy to talk about more. I really want to concentrate a little bit on how do we do this in relation to AI. But of course, I want to start with a discussion on this notion of trust. And I have some good news for that. As a true academic forum, we have this beautiful article that has been put out. This is a preprint of an article on public trust in science. You can see barely in the corner, right? Trust in science, scientists and their role across 68 countries. It does include Sweden. And of course, there are 241 authors. I'm not sure what author number 147 is or what he was thinking or she, right? But it's 68 countries. This is 70,000 people. So if we talk about scientific research and statistical awareness, this is quite a strong piece of research with all of these people. And the good news is that most people actually trust scientists globally. We see that there is this score of 3.62 out of 5. We're doing all right. Then the question becomes, how do we think about that? You can see a very brief snippet of this. Actually, I saw that Sweden is somewhere in between Chile and Brazil, above average. Well done. So that's a good news for you, but also we have some work to do to keep increasing that and making sure that this actually reflects in practice. But here's the other thing that I think is really important for us to understand in relation to the work that we do. Most people have a very strong opinion, of course. You look, over 80% of people think that scientists should communicate about science with the general public. Making our job a little bit easier, I hope. However, this is always a challenge. So on the trust factor, we're doing okay. And I think we need to make sure that we are clear about that and how we can increase that. There are all sorts of correlations, positive correlations, negative correlations, things that affect this notion of trust, and we can talk about those later. But I think for now, I move on because of time. Second thing, how do we do this? How do we make more effective science communication? And this is why I'm here, and I'm only going to briefly talk about this now, because I'll talk about it later a little bit more in depth on what the COALESCE project is, how we're partnering with organizations such as ones in Sweden, internally the VNA. And that's the good news, is that, of course, I am here because we are going to figure this out together. It is a lovely project. It is lovely people. It is way underfunded, like many other things, of course, because of what we want to do. But it is about learning and working together and providing resources and tools, because I promise you that there are certain really interesting things that are being done in the Basque country of Spain or in Romania that actually can contribute to your thinking in Sweden about how do we do science communication more effectively. And the reverse is true. The things that you are doing here need to be shared broadly about how do we actually connect well. So then you ask the question, the more important question, okay, Jason, we have this trust, we have this COALESCE project that is actually trying to bring us all together. Its success depends on people's commitments. But then you ask, how do we do this in a time of AI? All right, maybe you didn't ask that question, but it doesn't matter. I'm standing up here, so I get to tell you about this anyways at this moment in time. This is the area that I am particularly working on in specific and trying to think about. And for those of you who don't know the image, this is of a mechanical Turk. It's a fraudulent chess playing. It's sort of this ancient practice of hiding some of the processes that are behind. And when it comes to issues of AI, when we start thinking about AI, and then we'll talk about how this connects with science communication, people are either really optimistic or pessimistic and maybe hold both views at the same time. On the one hand, we know that it can carry out complex tasks. It can improve our efficiency and work in daily life. And it does spark some excitement about innovative potentials. On the other side, there are pessimists who recognize the potential for the loss, this loss of human uniqueness, the deception, the manipulation that's here, and then this, where does responsibility lie? And I want to bring up, how does this then connect with the work that we do as science communicators? So when we start thinking about this, on the one hand, there's some really good news when it comes to AI. AI can simplify much of the work that we do. It can begin to translate the scientific text, the scientific knowledge that we are working with into other languages. It can negotiate those and put those into context of summarizing papers, connecting with literature and complex issues. And then we end up seeing that this AI actually can assist us in communicating and our outreach efforts, whether those are news articles, social media posts. But AI is not just this translating tool, it's also something that can be dialogical. It can be this conversational process. And it gives us the potential for these immediate responses. People want to know things. You can have a conversation with an AI tool to actually understand science-related questions. You end up, in the best case scenario, and this is where we'll get to in a moment, right, of actually having reliable resources behind it and seeing them integrated into software environments. And this is, having the opportunity to speak as a keynote, this is where we really connect to the potentials for integrated tools and where we connect to this idea of maybe science can be more democratic, more open, more available to the average human being, the average person, to actually understand what science is about with something that can relate at them. These are the potentials for AI. I know, because of course I study this and think about this on a regular basis, that immediately many of you are going, well, wait a minute. There are concerns here. And of course there are concerns here, because critically we can think about the fact that there is often a response inaccuracy. There's these fictitious responses. And for those of you who don't know, when people talk about these notions of hallucinations, AI is always hallucinating. There is no moment in which it is not approximating the world in which we live. It is always doing that. It's just a question of whether we think, oh, this makes sense here, and then in other moments we go, oh, that doesn't make sense. What was it thinking? Well, it wasn't thinking. It was always approximating. And of course, the potential for biased responses, limitations in data, that is always there. The issue here, of course, is that then we see that we have to do all this extra work. If we're going to rely on AI for these possibilities, we end up having to do a lot more work to understand what's going on behind the scenes. And of course, the potential here is that AI becomes a driver of misinformation. It repeats things that are problematic, that we end up missing key factors in terms of the fraudulent manipulation of tools, and that we really have to introduce the awareness when using AI content. And so on the one hand, we have the potential for democratization of AI, of science communication through AI, but on the other hand, we potentially see a world in which an AI-driven infodemic actually undermines science communication. And I'm grateful because this work is something that Charlotte Bruns and myself and my team have been working on, and she actually helped me develop these slides and thinking through what do we need to do as science communicators. And one of the things that we talked about is this idea that good science communication is always a dialogue. It's always connecting. And generative AI never really knows who they're talking to. So the potential for us, the idea for us as science communicators, is that we have the potential to demonstrate something different. We are authentic, we are empathetic, we can account for cultural nuance. We are way more aware of current events and contextualize these facts. And so then we think about what do we do in an era in which public trust is there, but also sometimes always a question that we have to think about how do we be more effective as science communicators. And then when we talk about AI tools, we have to think about how do we balance this with the way in which we want to do things and our human agency, both for science communicators and their audience. I want to end by just mentioning that I firmly believe that science will change the world. And for those of you who are like, oh, that's a nice idealistic statement, Jason, that you might be making. Just a reminder that, of course, science is pretty good at prevailing. Not always, it doesn't always prevail, but it's pretty good at it, slowly, over time. That's because science learns, it grows, and it changes. However, science isn't the only thing that, of course, will change the world. It's going to have some competition. It's going to have competition with things like greed and nationalism and xenophobia and religious extremism and capitalism and any other isms that you might want to add here that will fight as they try to change the world alongside of science. But there are some allies for us as science communicators and science that hope will change the world, that interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary cooperation will change the world, that facts and truth spoken at the right time and the right ways with the people that can and will make a difference actually will change the world. And I want to end there because I want to talk about the fact that, why not end with a nice quote from Marie Curie, that we simply say that actually this moment, particularly when AI is pretty much everywhere, and we are thinking about how do we do this, and how do we produce and reinforce a democratic understanding of the science that we cherish as science communicators, that our job ends up being to reinforce an understanding and awareness of science so that this quote of Marie Curie comes true. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to talk with you. I will be here all day. So then I'm also happy for you to join us on COALESCE. Noting the political circumstances, of course, I want to note that we're slowly slipping away from X and Twitter and hopefully moving on, but we will see what happens there. However, you certainly can see us on our website and on LinkedIn quite regularly, and future processes are coming. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Jason. Thank you so much for your setting the frame, setting the scene today for the whole day, I think.
You're welcome.
Quite a mix, challenges and opportunities. We may have, and you also touched on several things that we're going to talk about throughout the day, so thank you for that.
Good.
We have a few questions, actually, that came in during the talk.
Perfect.
Thank you for the questions. And people want to know, it's about, I think, this preprint about the trust in different countries. The question is, in what extent do people in
autocratic, yeah.
trust science?
Yeah.
What is it?
I will have to read the article and to remind myself. One of the most interesting things I thought was actually one of the positive correlations in terms of trust in science was the degree of religious adherence. And largely in Islamic countries, which is really quite interesting. So it had this broad range of these 68 countries, and that was one of the more interesting findings. Yeah. That doesn't speak to autocratic governments, of course, but it does speak to some of the ways in which we might think about what we expect in terms of trust in science is actually a bit different than we might have anticipated.
Yes, and one question more. If you could say one thing about the one and only thing we could do to increase general trust in science and scientists, what would you do? What would that be?
I am a huge advocate for transparency. And so the word that I would always use is transparency. And I think this comes from a place where what we saw in COVID was an expectation that science has the answer. And what happened, at least from my perspective in COVID, is that we watched science grow and learn as it went forward. And part of the issue, of course, in a public is there's an expectation for science has the answer. But on the other hand, we know that science is always a process, is always growing, and that process needs to be transparent, and we need to demonstrate that always this is something that we are working on, and that no scientist says, here is the absolute answer for all time, for all purposes. And being transparent and open about that also broadens the potential that then we begin to have a better understanding of science as a public.
Super. I have another question I'm thinking of.
Okay.
Because we started out in a kind of a dire situation with the progress of democracy, the outlook for it, and you mentioned the election. We're not going to go into that more. No. You also you present some challenges, but and also encouraging for a greater salary. That was kind of hopeful, I think. But,
that would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yes, I know. But I think everyone agrees on that. But what gives you hope? You're working with this all day long when it comes to science and communication in the context that is extremely shifting, but what gives you hope?
Yeah. So first of all, it's always the people, because I think actually we see this relational process, and that's another thing that I would say, that always science communication has to be relational. That's difficult in a broad scale environment. One of the reasons that certain TikTokers or YouTubers become popular is because of what we would call, in my world, parasocial relationships. This illusion that you have a one-on-one relationship with these people that actually creates this a possibility of trust. But I think the other thing is, and again, it's a bit biased because I study AI, is that AI is beginning to unbalance things. And so it's making people scramble for answers and think about, okay, what do I trust? How do I understand the world around me? And actually, that gives me hope that we can provide answers, that they will turn to people who know things. And we do see, in a European context, a little bit less let's just say, trust in corporations and organizations that are there to make a profit off us, that there's an expectation that we do something differently in the European context. And I think for me, as a North American, having moved and lived in the Netherlands for quite a while now, I see this possibility that we can be a light amongst the world and say, actually, there's something better, broader, and that we are actually protecting and investing in our people in a different way.
Amazing. Thank you for that answer.
Yeah.
So disruption can actually be something that is positive.
I hope so, and I think that's where we need to leverage those moments. And that's why I end with a quote from Marie Curie, because I don't think fear is the answer. And I think that's something that I think we have to push forward, especially in a time where we see some disconcerting issues.
Okay, good. Thank you for bringing in that for this day, Jason.
You're very welcome.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
so much.
Thank you.